500 years ago, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote that it's better to be feared than loved. He taught princes how to manipulate, how to deceive, how to control others through cunning and force. The world ate it up. We built entire systems around his philosophy. But here's what Machiavelli never understood, what he was too afraid to write about. What would have made him the most dangerous man who ever lived? The ultimate power isn't controlling others. It's controlling the one thing that controls everything else, your mind. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you why everything you've been taught about power is not just wrong, it's keeping you weak, and why the most powerful people you'll ever meet aren't the ones screaming the loudest or demanding the most attention. They're the ones who've mastered something so fundamental, so profound, that they don't need to control anyone else, because they've learned to control themselves. But listen carefully, because once you see this, you can't unsee it. And the version of you that's been chasing external validation, trying to impress others, seeking power over people, that version won't survive what I'm about to show you. You know that feeling when someone walks into a room and without saying a word, without making a scene, everyone just notices. There's something about them, something magnetic, something that makes you think, I want what they have. You've felt it, haven't you? That pull towards certain people who seem to operate on a different frequency than the rest of us. Most people think it's charisma. Some call it confidence. Others say it's natural leadership. But they're all wrong. What you're sensing is something much more rare, much more powerful. You're sensing someone who has achieved what Machiavelli spent his entire life searching for, but never found: true dominion. Not dominion over others. Dominion over the chaos inside their own head. See, Machiavelli understood half the equation. He saw that most people are driven by fear, by desire, by impulses they can't control, and he thought, if I can understand these impulses, I can manipulate them. He was right about the first part. Most people are controlled by forces they don't understand, but he made a fatal error in the second part. He thought the solution was to become the controller. But the real solution? Become uncontrollable. Think about the most powerful person you know personally. Not the richest, not the most famous, but the most genuinely powerful. I bet they have something in common that you can't quite put your finger on. They don't seem desperate for your attention. They don't need to prove anything. When they speak, people listen not because they demand it, but because what they say carries weight. They move through the world with a kind of calm certainty that's almost unsettling. You know what that is? That's what happens when someone has won the only war that actually matters, the war against their own weakness. While everyone else is out there trying to build empires, trying to accumulate followers, trying to gain influence over others, these people have realized something profound. The person who controls themselves controls everything. Because every external battle, every challenge, every obstacle you'll ever face, it all comes down to one thing: how well you can manage what's happening between your ears. Machiavelli wrote about conquering city-states, but he never conquered the one territory that would have made him truly unstoppable: his own mind. Here's what he missed, what almost everyone misses. Every time you try to control someone else, you're actually revealing how little control you have over yourself. Every time you need someone to behave a certain way for you to feel okay, you're advertising your weakness. Every time you get angry because the world isn't bending to your will, you're proving that your will isn't strong enough to bend you. Real power, the kind that makes people stop and take notice, the kind that opens doors without you having to knock, the kind that creates opportunities instead of just taking them. That power comes from one place: your ability to remain centered when everything around you is chaos, your capacity to choose your response instead of just reacting, your willingness to do what needs to be done even when you don't feel like doing it, especially when you don't feel like doing it. But here's where most people get confused. They think self-control means suppression. They think it means becoming a robot, shutting down emotions, never feeling anything. That's not control, that's avoidance. True self-mastery isn't about eliminating your emotions or desires. It's about becoming the director instead of just being an actor in your own life. Think about it this way. Right now, as you're listening to this, there are probably a dozen thoughts competing for your attention. Maybe you're thinking about something you need to do later. Maybe you're judging what I'm saying. Maybe you're getting distracted by sounds around you. Maybe you're wondering if this is really going to help you or just another thing that sounds good but doesn't work. Most people have no choice in this moment. Their attention goes wherever it wants to go. Their mind wanders, and they follow. A thought pops up and they believe it. An emotion arises and they're swept away by it. They're passengers in their own consciousness. But what if you could be the driver instead? What if instead of your thoughts thinking you could choose your thoughts? What if instead of your emotions controlling your behavior could influence your emotions? What if instead of being at the mercy of every impulse, every urge, every random mental occurrence, you could decide what gets your attention and what doesn't? That's not just possible. That's what power actually looks like. The ancient Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world at his time, didn't write about conquering more territory. He wrote about conquering himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That's not philosophy. That's practical instruction for becoming unstoppable. Because here's what happens when you develop real self-mastery. Other people can sense it. Not consciously, but they feel it. There's something about someone who isn't constantly seeking validation that makes others want to give it. There's something about someone who doesn't need to control the room that makes the room want to follow them. There's something about someone who has their internal world handled that makes others trust them with external responsibilities. It's magnetic because it's rare. In a world full of people who are controlled by their phones, their emotions, their impulses, their fears, someone who has genuine self-discipline stands out like a lighthouse in a storm. But let's get specific about what this actually looks like in real life. You know that moment when someone cuts you off in traffic and you feel that instant rage? Most people have no choice in what happens next. The anger arises and they're angry. Their day is ruined. They carry that energy into their next interaction. They let a complete stranger dictate their emotional state. Someone with self-mastery feels the anger too. They're not a robot, but they have a choice. They can feel the emotion without being hijacked by it. They can acknowledge it, understand its message, and then decide how to respond. Maybe they take a deep breath. Maybe they use it as a reminder to practice patience. Maybe they even feel compassion for someone who's clearly having a worse day than they are. Same stimulus, completely different outcome. That's power. Or think about this. You're working on something important, and you feel the urge to check your phone. Most people don't even recognize this as a choice. The urge arises, and they check. They've handed over control of their attention to a device, to an algorithm designed to hijack their focus. Someone with self-mastery feels the urge too, but they recognize it as just that. An urge, not a command, not an emergency, just a mental event that they can observe without obeying. They might say to themselves, "Interesting. My brain wants distraction right now. I wonder why. Am I avoiding something difficult? Am I feeling frustrated? Let me acknowledge that and then return to what actually matters." Same urge, completely different relationship to it. That's what separates the powerful from the powerless. But here's what nobody talks about. The reason most people never develop this kind of control isn't because they can't. It's because they don't realize they're in a war. Every single day, there are forces trying to hijack your attention, manipulate your emotions, and control your behavior. And most people think they're just living life. You wake up and immediately reach for your phone. You've just handed the first hour of your day to whoever decided to send you notifications. You feel stressed about something at work, so you scroll social media for relief. You've just trained your brain that discomfort should be avoided rather than worked through. You're tired, so you binge watch something instead of going to bed early. You've just taught yourself that short-term pleasure matters more than long-term well-being. These aren't random events. These are battles. And every time you give in without choosing, you're losing. Every time you react instead of respond, you're surrendering territory in the war for your own mind. Machiavelli would have called this the ultimate conquest, but he was too busy looking outward to see it. Now, let me show you what victory in this war actually looks like. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and instead of immediately reaching for your phone, you take a moment to set an intention for your day. Just 5 seconds of conscious choice instead of automatic reaction. That's not productivity advice. That's reclaiming sovereignty over your own consciousness. Imagine being in a difficult conversation, and instead of getting defensive or shutting down, you pause and ask yourself, What response would serve this situation best? Not what feels good in the moment, not what protects your ego, but what would actually move things forward. That's not communication skills. That's wielding your mind like a precision instrument. Imagine feeling anxious about something, and instead of trying to escape the feeling or being overwhelmed by it, you get curious about it. You ask, what is this anxiety trying to tell me? What does it want me to pay attention to? How can I use this energy constructively? That's not emotional management. That's emotional alchemy. This is what real power looks like. Not controlling others, but becoming someone who can't be controlled. Not manipulating circumstances, but being able to thrive regardless of circumstances. Not building walls to protect yourself, but becoming strong enough that you don't need walls. And here's the beautiful paradox. The more control you develop over yourself, the less you need to control anything else. The more centered you become, the more other people want to be around you. The more disciplined you get with your own thoughts and actions, the more freedom you actually have. Because freedom isn't the ability to do whatever you want whenever you want. That's just slavery to impulse. Real freedom is the ability to choose your response to whatever life throws at you. It's being the author of your story instead of just a character reacting to the plot. But let's talk about what this transformation actually requires. Because it's not what most people think. You don't need to meditate for hours. You don't need to retreat to a monastery. You don't need to read ancient texts or master complex philosophical systems. You need to start paying attention to the small moments where you currently have no choice and create choice. That moment when you feel frustrated and want to snap at someone, that's a moment of opportunity. Can you feel the frustration without letting it drive your behavior? Can you use that energy to communicate more clearly instead of more harshly? That moment when you're procrastinating on something important? That's not a character flaw, it's intelligence. Your brain is trying to protect you from something. Discomfort, failure, judgment. Can you acknowledge that protection while still moving forward? Can you feel the resistance and do the thing anyway? That moment when someone criticizes you and you feel that immediate urge to defend or attack? Can you pause long enough to ask whether there's any truth in what they're saying? Can you separate your worth as a person from the validity of their feedback? These aren't grand gestures. These are tiny rebellions against the tyranny of automatic response. And each one makes you stronger. Each one gives you more choice in the next moment. Each one builds the muscle of conscious living. But here's what will really change everything. Once you start experiencing what it feels like to have genuine choice in these moments, you'll never want to go back to being unconscious. Once you taste what it's like to remain calm in the middle of chaos, to stay focused when everyone around you is distracted, to respond with wisdom instead of reacting with emotion, you'll realize you've been living in a prison you didn't even know existed. And the key to that prison? You've had it all along. You just didn't know you were the one who locked the door. This is what Machiavelli never understood. He thought power meant making others fear you. But the ultimate power is making your own fears irrelevant. He thought strength meant dominating others. But true strength is dominating the voice in your head that tells you you're not enough. He thought influence meant controlling external circumstances. But lasting influence comes from being someone who can't be thrown off course by external circumstances. When you develop this kind of self-mastery, something incredible happens. You stop needing the world to be different for you to be okay. You stop requiring other people to behave a certain way for you to feel secure. You stop depending on external validation to know your worth. And paradoxically, this is when the world starts responding to you differently. People sense strength, even when they can't name it. They're drawn to someone who has their internal world handled, because it's so rare. In a culture of emotional reactivity, someone with genuine emotional regulation stands out. In a world of short attention spans, someone who can focus deeply has a massive advantage. In an environment of constant distraction, someone who can stay present has almost supernatural power. But the real transformation isn't how others see you, it's how you see yourself. Right now, if you're like most people, you probably have a voice in your head that criticizes you, doubts you, worries about what others think, reminds you of past failures, predicts future disasters. That voice feels like you, but it's not. It's just programming. And like any program, it can be rewritten. What if instead of that voice, you had an internal ally? What if your inner dialogue was encouraging instead of discouraging? What if your mind was working for you instead of against you? What if your thoughts were tools you picked up and put down as needed, rather than storms you had to weather? This isn't positive thinking. This isn't about pretending everything is fine when it's not. This is about becoming the kind of person who can face reality clearly and respond to it powerfully. This is about developing the internal resources to handle whatever life brings without losing your center. And here's the most profound part. When you truly master yourself, you don't need to prove it to anyone. Your presence speaks for itself. Your actions carry weight. Your words have impact not because you're trying to be influential, but because they come from a place of genuine strength and clarity. You become what Machiavelli was actually searching for but couldn't name: someone who is truly undefeatable. Not because you never face challenges, but because you've developed the capacity to meet any challenge from a place of choice rather than reaction, wisdom rather than emotion, strength rather than fear. This is the power beyond Machiavelli's wildest dreams. The power to be free in any circumstance. The power to remain yourself regardless of what others do. The power to create your life from the inside out instead of just reacting to what happens from the outside in. So the question isn't whether you can develop this kind of self-mastery. The question is whether you will. Because every moment of every day, you're either building the muscle of conscious choice or letting it atrophy. You're either becoming more powerful or staying powerless. You're either the author of your story or just a character in someone else's. The choice, as always, is yours. And that choice, that's where your real power lives. That's where it's always lived. You just forgot you had it, but now you remember. And everything changes from here.